Okay. So first of all, I'm gonna tell you a bit more about myself and why I got into this work. So basically, breath has always been an important theme in my life. Not necessarily in a good way. Growing up, I always struggled with severe allergies, and as a result, I had some shortness of breath, a lot of congestion, stuffy nose, asthma, and then I also suffered from panic attacks. Then as I grew older, oh, is this working? Wait. Can you guys see the screen? Think you can, right? So as I got older, the allergies kind of shifted, and I started to develop gut issues, and then the problems with the breathing kind of got better. But unfortunately, the anxiety got worse. So by the time I was about 26, the anxiety got so bad that I eventually suffered a burnout. And that's when I got into breathing exercises. Now, initially, I would just use them as a band-aid. So every once in a while, I would do 5 to 10-minute exercises, just to basically prevent a panic attack. So whenever I was feeling stressed or very anxious, I would do these exercises. But then on days where I felt okay, I would kind of just ignore it. Then after a while, I started wondering if these 5 to 10-minute exercises can do so much, because once I started doing them, I never had a panic attack again. So they really helped me prevent panic attacks. So I thought, what more can breathing do? And that's when I really got into breath work, started practicing different kind of modalities, and then eventually got certified as a breathwork coach. So today I kind of combine functional breathing, where we look at people's breathing patterns and really try to optimize those. I combine that with other breathwork facilities, such as or modalities, such as transformational breathwork, and then practices to regulate the nervous system. So in my one-on-one sessions, I usually divide it up between like 2 parts. So the first part will be functional breathing, where we really look at people's breathing patterns and try to see what we can do to improve those and ensure optimal health. And then during the second part of the session, I will usually either do a very regulating, calming breathwork practice, where we just try to calm down the nervous system, or we will go into transformational breathwork, where we really try to look at unprocessed emotions, unprocessed trauma, and work on stress. I'm just gonna check the chat box. I got distracted, sorry. But it's nothing important. I'm gonna close it again. So yeah, that's what I do today. So before we get into the topic of today, which is slowing down the breath and basically the downsides of overbreathing, we're gonna do a quick test, and it's gonna be fairly easy. So I'm gonna take a stopwatch. I'm gonna put it on 30 seconds, and what you're gonna do is you're just gonna sit in a relaxed, comfortable position with one hand on the chest and then one hand right below the sternum, so above the navel. And you're gonna continue to breathe normally. So you're not gonna force anything, you're not gonna control anything. You're just gonna breathe the way you normally would. And when I say start, so when I push the timer, you start counting your breaths. So 1 breath in and 1 breath out is 1. Or if you start with 1 out, then 1 out plus 1 in is 1. You get you get it, right? So 1 inhale, 1 exhale is 1. And when I say stop, you're gonna take that number, you're gonna multiply it by 2, so you're gonna double it. Let's say you got to a 5 count, and that's gonna be 10. And you put that number in the chat box, okay? So just get comfortable. Relax the shoulders. Just keep breathing normally. And then 1, 2, 3, start. Don't force anything. Don't try to control anything. Just keep counting. Stop. Just gonna look at the chat box. So you can put your number in there. Okay, 12. Anyone else? 16. Oh, that person sent me a direct message, so maybe I shouldn't have said that out loud. Sorry. 14. Okay. 10. Okay. 5. Should I multiply? Yes, by 2. So that's 10. Okay, so how do I... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having a bit of trouble with the chat box. Anyway. So what does that number mean? So our ideal breathing rate is 6 breaths per minute. Now, anything below 12 is okay. But most people today are breathing 12 to 18 breaths per minute. For comparison, in the 60s and 70s, that was 8 to 12 breaths per minute. So something happened there, right? For some reason, we started breathing faster. And we started over breathing, because if you look at it, if you're breathing 18 breaths per minute, that's basically triple the amount of breaths you should be taking. So this indicates higher levels of stress. Let's look into that. So modern day life has added quite a lot of stressors to the mix. So we as modern day humans have started breathing faster. So today we're going to look at how chronic stress contributes to overbreathing, how unhealthy diets contribute to overbreathing, overheated homes, and bad posture. So those 4 factors, we're going to look at those. So first of all, stress. Like I mentioned, modern day life, we have a lot of extra stresses that we didn't deal with back in the 60s, 70s. And certainly not when we were hunter-gatherers, right? So I'm thinking news updates, deadlines, traffic jams, all that jazz. So we're constantly being bombarded with these tiny little stressors. And what that does is it puts us in a state of fight or flight. And what do we do when, for example, out in the wild, we run into a predator? We fight or we flight. I would flight, honestly. And what happens then is we start breathing fast and shallow, because that's way more beneficial in a situation like that. But today we don't need to, you don't need to run away from traffic jams, deadlines, news updates. So you're still breathing fast and shallow when you shouldn't be. And because it's like this constant chain of little stressors, it keeps you in a state of overbreathing. Then unhealthy diets. A lot of people today are overeating, which causes a heavy stomach. And if we breathe optimally, we breathe through the diaphragm, right? But the stomach is located below the diaphragm. So if that stomach is very heavy, then that kind of makes it harder for the diaphragm to move. So it will be easier for your body to just opt for shallow chest breathing, which again results in overbreathing. Then poor diet, like a lot of modern foods are processed, a lot of sugars, a lot of things that are not good for us. This results in nutrient deficiencies, and eventually this results in underdeveloped faces and narrow airways. Now, what happens when our face gets smaller and our airways get tighter? Well, it becomes easier for us to breathe through the mouth, and the mouth is associated with overbreathing. Now, for those who think like our faces are pretty fine, there's nothing wrong with our face. Well, if you compare the skull of a modern day human to that of a caveman or even an aboriginal, you will see that they have a much wider jaw. They have pretty much perfect straight teeth with no cavities. They tend to have wider noses with wider airways. So they could breathe much more easily. If you look at people's faces today, a lot of people need braces, so crooked teeth. A lot of us have cavities. A lot of us have very small jaws. So this results in all types of breathing issues and overbreathing. Then overheated homes is pretty short one. So heat removes moisture from the air becomes very dry, and when you're constantly inhaling dry air, that causes irritation, inflammation, and it will result in all kinds of issues, congestion and stuff, making it harder to breathe and causing you to mouth breathe, and by doing that, overbreathe. And then bad posture is again a bit of a wider topic. So first of all, we have our desk jobs and the constant looking at a phone. What we do when we sit at our desk or look at our phone, well, if we sit at our desk, we often crunch over, again, not leaving enough room for that diaphragm to move, to freely move. And then when you look at your phone, like you do this weird thing with your neck, that's just not causing you to breathe ideally. So that's no good. And then there's one thing that we don't really see as bad posture, but looking at it from a health perspective, it actually is bad posture. And that is the constant sucking in of bellies. So we tell our usually daughters, but sometimes probably even sons, to suck in their bellies because it makes them look more fit, and no one wants to look at a belly, I suppose. But what that does is, if you're constantly pulling in your belly, you don't leave any room for that diaphragm again to expand. So again, this will result in upper chest breathing, which is related to overbreathing. And bad posture is kind of a two-way street, because the diaphragm is also the roof of the core. It's connected to all these other core muscles, and it's connected to the spine. So if we breathe properly and we breathe through that diaphragm, then not only are we training that diaphragm muscle, we are kind of training all the muscles that are connected to it, and we are stabilizing the spine. On the other hand, when you are chest breathing, you miss out on like all that action going on in the core, and the spine might begin to show some issues, let's say. So that's also very important. Then another thing, you might notice that when you breathe from the diaphragm, you automatically tend to kind of relax your shoulders and neck a bit, right? You take tension away from the shoulders and neck. Whereas if you're breathing from the upper chest, you tend to just tense everything up. So obviously, diaphragmatic breathing will result in just less issues with the neck and the shoulders, but also less tension headaches, because tension headaches are really kind of related to the neck and shoulders and a lot of tension there. Okay. Another test. I'm just gonna take a minute to sip my tea. So we're gonna do pretty much the same, but this time I'm gonna give it 1 minute, and I'm gonna ask you to look at 4 different things. So again, you're gonna breathe normally. You're not gonna force anything. You're not gonna try to control anything. Now that we know you should slow down the breath, we're not gonna try and do that. Just breathe normally. Put one hand again on your chest, one hand on your diaphragm, and then try to pay attention when you breathe. Which hand is moving? Is it the upper hand, the lower hand, or both? How does your breathing feel? Is it steady, or is it kind of all over the place? What's the point of entry? Is it the mouth or is it the nose? Can you hear the breath or is it silent? So I repeat, timer to 1 minute. Just breathe normally and then ask yourself, where do I feel the movement? How does the breath feel? What is the point of entry? And can I hear the breath? So let's see. So get ready, get comfortable, sit up straight, shoulders relaxed. 1, 2, 3, go. Someone is saying just breathe normally, gets too focused on the breath and can't breathe normally. Yeah. Oh, you can stop, by the way. We're already over 1 minute, but it's okay. This was not, we didn't have to do any counting here, right? Okay. So now try to answer those 4 questions. You can put them in the chat box, or you can just keep the answers to yourself. What we're gonna do now is, so I'm sorry if I for a minute. Don't look at the chat box. You can put your answers in there, but I'm gonna continue to explain what should have been happening. So ideally, you should only feel your lower hand moving, because that's where the diaphragm is, right? And then the breaths should feel steady, smooth, and preferably they are quiet. And as you might have guessed, the point of entry should be the nose. Now, if you notice that both your hands were moving, or your upper hand was moving, or that your breath was shaky or very loud, then you really need to try and work on deep diaphragmatic breaths, sending the breath down, trying to focus on only feeling the movement in the lower hand, quietening down the breath, and trying to make it smooth and steady. If your breath is all over the place, then that usually is a sign of stress as well. And if you have trouble breathing through the nose, then look at tomorrow's seminar, because that's where we get into nasal breathing. But that's also something you should definitely be working on then. Now, I've mentioned the diaphragm a couple of times, but what is the diaphragm? Because some of you might be like, she's talking about the diaphragm, don't know what that is. Well, it's our main breathing muscle, even though a lot of us don't use it that way. And it's dome-shaped, right? And as you can see in this video, it sits right below the lower ribs, and it runs all the way around. When you inhale, it contracts and pulls the air down into the lungs. When you exhale, it relaxes and expels air from the lungs up. So it's really nice to kind of just look at this video and try to visualize your own diaphragm. And really notice how it's not just, because sometimes you hear people say, take deep belly breaths. And if you do that, you're not really training your diaphragmatic muscle or your diaphragm, because you're only working on that frontal movement. If you want to work on your entire diaphragm, which is recommended, by the way, you really want to focus on all sides. So you want to feel it moving in the front, on the sides, and on the back. So that's a side note. Now, the diaphragm is connected to the vagus nerve, which triggers the rest and digest response in the nervous system. Now, remember how I previously said that upper chest breathing is related to fight or flight? Well, as we see now, that diaphragmatic breathing is related to rest and digest. Not just in the sense that it stimulates that vagus nerve and triggers that response in the nervous system, but also in the way that it massages our digestive organs. Because if you look at the placement of the diaphragm, there's a lot of digestive organs underneath there. So every time you breathe through the diaphragm, you massage the stomach, the intestines, stuff like that. If you don't breathe through the diaphragm, you miss out on that massaging. And also your body never really gets into that rest and digest state, which will really or might really impact your digestive system and can cause digestive issues. Then another thing to note is that about 50% of all lymph nodes in the body are situated in the stomach area. Now, the lymphatic system is basically our waste disposal system, right? It gets rid of toxins and stuff like that. So it's really important for immune function, for staying healthy. And it's kind of similar in a way to the cardiovascular system, in that it moves around fluid. Cardiovascular system moves around blood. The lymphatic system moves around lymph fluid. Now there's one big difference. The cardiovascular system has a pump, being the heart, whereas the lymphatic system doesn't have a pump. The movement of the fluid within the lymphatic system is dependent upon our movement. And a big part of that, remember I said 50% of the lymph nodes, or maybe even more, are located in the stomach area. So a big part of that movement is dependent on the movement of our diaphragm. In a way, you could say that the lymphatic system does have a bit of a pump, and it's the diaphragm. Except where we're always using the heart, we are not always using the diaphragm. So by not breathing deeply into that diaphragm, again, by breathing from the chest, we miss out on that stimulation of lymph flow, which again will result in a lot of health issues. Bad lymph flow is usually associated with fatigue, just feeling sluggish, tired, a bad immune system, always getting sick, stuff like that. Then one third thing I'm going to note here is we already kind of touched upon this. I told you earlier that the diaphragm is the roof of the core, right? Hold on a minute. Now, in that sense, it's also connected to the pelvic bowl and the pelvic muscles. And what happens is, when the diaphragm contracts, the pelvic muscles relax, and the other way around. So every time you take a deep breath through the diaphragm, you give your pelvic bowl a little workout. Now, if you're always breathing from the chest, you miss out on that. And as a result, your pelvic muscles might get weak, which will then result in sexual dysfunction, prolapse, stuff like that. So that's also a good thing to keep in mind. So next we're going to get into the problems that are associated with overbreathing, but I think we can see that we already kind of got a lot of our answers here. So let's see. Oh yeah, here I kind of just sum it up again. So modern life, a lot of stressors, shallow breathing, upper chest breathing, which is related to that fight or flight response, which results in chronic stress, right? Whereas the diaphragm, rest and digest, no stress. So, and then, as I said, the effects of overbreathing. So as it puts us in that constant stress, it will result in everything related to stress, really, like anxiety attacks, panic attacks, insomnia, mood disorders, all that type of thing. But then there's one thing we haven't really gotten into, and that is the fact that overbreathing also causes the narrowing of airways, the constriction of blood vessels, and as a result, a reduced blood flow. So certain parts of the body, as a result of overbreathing, might not get enough oxygen. And so depending on which part doesn't get enough oxygen, you'll get certain issues. A couple of examples: if your gut doesn't get enough oxygen, you might see issues with the gut, digestive issues. And as we saw earlier, remember, the diaphragm also plays an important role there. So it kind of just adds to it, right? You have the narrowing of airways and the constriction of blood, leading to not enough oxygen going to the gut. But then you're also missing out on that massage movement. So it's kind of, it goes a lot of ways. I got a couple of other examples there, but you get the gist, right? So let's get into the mechanics of what we just said. So we said that overbreathing results in the constriction of blood vessels and a lack of oxygenation, right? So how does that work? As you can see in this video, when we, or as most people probably know, but I'm gonna repeat it anyway, just to make sure. When we breathe in oxygen. When we breathe out carbon dioxide, right? In oxygen, out carbon dioxide. Now, a lot of people think that it's actually a lack of oxygen that triggers a breathing response. But in fact, we always have around 95 to 99% oxygen in our blood. So it's not a lack of oxygen that is triggering our breathing response. It's actually the levels of carbon dioxide in our blood that trigger a breathing response. Now, many people think of carbon dioxide as a waste gas. You know, we just breathe it out. It's not important. It's a lot of focus on oxygen and not that much focus on carbon dioxide. When in fact, carbon dioxide is actually a pretty important gas because it's the amount of carbon dioxide in our blood that determines how much of the oxygen that's there, you know, 95 to 99%. The level of CO2, so the level of carbon dioxide, determines how much of that oxygen we can actually put to use. See, CO2, so carbon dioxide, is a dilator. It opens up the blood vessels and it allows for the oxygen to flow through the body. So that's very important to know. Because I think what I said earlier is starting to make a lot more sense, because when we are overbreathing, we are constantly expelling carbon dioxide. So we're constantly taking in oxygen, which is not really needed probably because we have plenty of it. But we're always putting out carbon dioxide. So we have plenty of oxygen, but no carbon dioxide to actually open up those blood vessels and to make sure the body gets oxygenated. And then another thing, if you're always overbreathing, your CO2 tolerance, so your tolerance to carbon dioxide, will also become lower, which will then result in even more overbreathing. So once you get into the habit of overbreathing, it's really hard to get out of it without doing daily exercises and really working on that CO2 tolerance. That's what we do in functional breathing. We really work on slowing down the breath, basically. So in conclusion, for today, we need to take slow, deep, diaphragmatic breaths through the nose. Now, tomorrow we will see a bit more about nasal breathing. We will look into how to slow down the breath. But for now, I'm just gonna do one more simple exercise that you can do at home, where, you know, I don't have to help you with it. I can just explain it now. We can do it together, and then you can take it home with you before we get into the exercise, I would just like to ask you to check out my current offers, because I have a couple of offers going until the 6th of March. So my money mindset journey and then the Breathe with Tina platform, there's an early bird discount which expires very soon, so at the end of this seminar. So if you want to take advantage of that, I would tell you to check that out. And so yeah, for now, just get comfortable, sit up straight. You can close the eyes if you want to. Put one hand on the chest and one hand on the belly. And just turn your focus inwards for a bit. Try to observe your breath. Try to see how it feels to pay attention to your body. See if there's any tension there, and if so, try to release it a little bit. So try to release any tension from the jaw, the shoulders, the forehead. Keep your spine straight. Tongue to the roof of the mouth. Just observe your breath. And as you do that, steer it down a little more. So really try to go for those deep diaphragmatic breaths. Feel your diaphragm expand. Softly breathe in through the nose. And try to make your breath as silent as possible. Allow your feet sink into the ground. Keep pushing that breath down into the diaphragm. Try to make it as silent as possible. And then we're slowly going to get into box breathing. For now, you can just continue breathing as you are while I explain the exercise. So soon I will start counting, and we will do 4 inhales. Then we will hold for 4 counts inhale, I'm sorry. Then we will hold for 4, exhale for 4, and again hold for 4. And then we will repeat that a couple of times. So in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and again hold for 4. Okay, so you can take a deep breath in, out, and in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. There you go.